They say your home is your castle. Well, if that's true, then my field is my moat, protecting me from the chaos of HOA meetings, nosy neighbors, and whatever Karen down the street is complaining about this week. But let me tell you something. No one ever warns you what to do when your moat gets invaded. And by invaded, I mean waking up on a perfectly good Monday morning to find a bunch of strangers digging trenches in your yard like they're reenacting World War I. At first, I thought maybe I was still dreaming. After all, it's not every day you see a guy in a neon vest waving a clipboard around like he's Moses parting the Red Sea. Except instead of water, it's my tomato patch. But nope, this was real life. And as I stood there in my robe, coffee mug in hand, watching these people stomp around my property like they owned the place, one thought crossed my mind. What fresh HOA hell is this? Now, I'm not the kind of guy who goes looking for trouble. I don't yell at kids to get off my lawn or call animal control every time Karen's dog barks past 9 p.m. But this felt personal. My field isn't just dirt and grass. It's where I grow my tomatoes. Okay? Sometimes. Park my rusty old tractor, which hasn't moved in years, and occasionally hide from HOA board members when they come knocking about hedge regulations. And yet here were these strangers, these invaders, digging up my land like it was their God-given right. So naturally, I did what any self-respecting homeowner would do. I marched out there in my slippers and robe, coffee mug clutched tightly like it was a weapon, and demanded answers. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound authoritative while also balancing a half-full cup of lukewarm coffee. "What exactly do you think you're doing on my property?" Clipboard guy, let's call him Steve, looked up at me like I just interrupted his Nobel Prize acceptance speech. "We're installing fiber optic cables," he said matter-of-factly, as if that explained everything. "Fiber optic cables?" I repeated, trying to process this absurdity. "On my land?" "Yes," Steve said with all the confidence of someone who truly believes clipboards make them invincible. He flipped through his papers like he was searching for the meaning of life, or maybe just an excuse to ignore me. "We have an easement." Yes, the dreaded easement. If you've ever owned property in America, you know that word is basically legalese for, we can do whatever we want on your land because someone signed a piece of paper decades ago. Apparently, back when electricity was first being installed in this area, probably sometime around when dinosaurs roamed the earth, the utility company secured an easement for power lines. And now, thanks to some legal loophole that only lawyers and HOA presidents understand, that easement also allowed them to install fiber optic cables. "But this is my property," I argued. "I pay taxes on it. I mow it." "Well, sometimes." Steve shrugged with all the enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be anywhere else but here talking to me. "You still own the land," he said casually, as if that was supposed to make me feel better. "We're just using it." "Using it? Using it." That's like someone borrowing your car without asking and then telling you it's fine because you still own the title. At this point, I realized two things. One, these guys weren't going to stop digging just because I was standing there looking indignant in my robe. And two, I needed reinforcements. So, I called Carl, my lawyer who specializes in real estate law and has a voice so monotone it could put an insomniac to sleep. Carl explained that yes, technically they had the right to be there under the easement agreement. But, and this is where things got interesting, they were supposed to notify me first. Apparently, there's some rule about giving property owners a heads up before tearing up their land. Common courtesy and all that. Armed with this newfound knowledge and another cup of coffee, I marched back out to confront Steve. "Did you notify me about this?" I asked. "We sent a letter," Steve said without missing a beat. "A letter?" I repeated skeptically. "I didn't get any letter." "Well," he said with a smirk that made me want to fling my coffee at him, "we sent it." And just like that, the plot thickened. Either they sent the letter and it got lost in the mail, unlikely, or they didn't send one at all, much more likely. Either way, I wasn't about to let them off the hook that easily. "Okay," I said slowly, channeling every courtroom drama protagonist from TV history. "If you didn't properly notify me, doesn't that mean you're technically trespassing?" Steve's smirk faltered for just a moment before he recovered his composure. "We're within our rights under the easement," he insisted. "But you didn't notify me," I shot back triumphantly. At this point, one of the workers, let's call him Shovel Guy, chimed in, "Look man, we're just doing our job. Your job is digging up my field without permission." I snapped back, "So forgive me if I'm not rolling out the red carpet for you." Shovel Guy muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like "crazy homeowner" and went back to digging. By now, a small crowd had gathered, neighbors peeking out from behind their curtains and HOA Karen. Every neighborhood has one. Standing on her porch with her arms crossed like she was ready to file complaints against both me and the fiber optic crew. But here's the thing about living under an HOA. When push comes to shove, even Karen will side with you if it means sticking it to someone else. So when she marched over and started grilling Steve about whether their work complied with HOA regulations, spoiler alert, it didn't. I knew I had an ally, even if it was Karen. Long story short, the fiber optic crew packed up their gear and left before lunchtime, promising to come back once they'd sorted out their paperwork. And while they may have won the battle, because let's face it, they'll be back, I felt like I'd won a small victory for property owners everywhere. As for me, well, let's just say this isn't over yet. After the fiber optic crew packed up and left my field, I thought I'd finally have a moment to breathe. But no, this was just the beginning. You see, I'm not the kind of guy who lets people stomp all over my property without consequences. If HOA Steve and his clipboard brigade thought they could dig up my land and walk away scot-free, they clearly underestimated my ability to hold a grudge. So, I did what any rational person would do. I went down the rabbit hole of legal research to figure out how to fight back. Now, let me tell you something about easements. If you ever want to lose faith in humanity, or at least in property law, just spend an afternoon reading about them. Turns out, easements are like the Swiss Army knife of legal loopholes. They can be used for everything from utility poles to underground cables, and once they're in place, they're harder to get rid of than glitter after a craft project. The kicker? Most of these easements were granted decades ago by people who probably didn't realize they were signing away their descendants' peace of mind. But here's where it gets interesting. According to my lawyer Carl, the human embodiment of a legal textbook, there's a little thing called scope of use when it comes to easements. Basically, if the original easement was for power lines, then using it for fiber optic cables might be pushing the boundaries, unless the wording is vague enough to allow for compatible uses. And wouldn't you know it? The easement on my property fell into that gray area. So I started digging, not literally because that's what got us into this mess in the first place, but metaphorically. I pulled out every document related to my property, including the original deed and a stack of HOA bylaws that could rival War and Peace in length. Somewhere in that mountain of paperwork, I found the original easement agreement from 1972. It was written in legalese so dense it might as well have been hieroglyphics, but one phrase stood out: for the transmission and distribution of electrical energy. No mention of fiber optics, no mention of internet, just good old-fashioned electricity. Armed with this nugget of information, I called Carl again. "Carl," I said, "I think we've got them." Carl sighed, a sound that conveyed both skepticism and mild annoyance. "Jack," he said in his usual monotone drawl, "easements are interpreted broadly. Just because it doesn't explicitly mention fiber optics doesn't mean it excludes them." "But what about scope of use?" I countered. "Doesn't this exceed the scope?" "Maybe," Carl admitted begrudgingly, "but you'd need to prove that laying fiber optic cables imposes an additional burden on your property." "An additional burden?" I repeated. "Carl, they dug up half my field. If that's not a burden, I don't know what is." Carl paused for a moment before responding. "Fine," he said. "Let me look into it." While Carl was busy doing whatever lawyers do when they're looking into things, I decided to take matters into my own hands. And by that, I mean I spent hours Googling terms like fiber optic easement lawsuits and HOA overreach horror stories. Turns out I wasn't alone in my struggle. Across the country, homeowners were battling similar issues. Utility companies using outdated easements to install new infrastructure without proper consent. One case caught my eye: West versus Louisville Gas and Electric Company. Apparently, Some poor guy named West had his property turned into a fiber optic playground under an old utility easement meant for power lines. He argued that this exceeded the scope of the original agreement, but the court ruled against him, citing something called Section 621 of the Communications Act. According to this law, cable operators can use existing utility easements as long as their new use is compatible with the original purpose. Compatible? Really? Since when does digging trenches and laying cables count as compatible with anything other than ruining someone's day? But then I found another case, Marcus Cable Associates versus Crone. This one had a different outcome. The Texas Supreme Court ruled that installing fiber optic cables exceeded the scope of an easement originally granted for electricity transmission. Finally, a glimmer of hope. And guess what? My property is in Texas. Fueled by this small victory and several cups of coffee, I decided it was time to confront HOA Steve again. Not with slippers and sarcasm this time, but with cold, hard facts. I drafted an email so scathing it could have melted steel. Dear Steve, it has come to my attention that your recent decision to allow fiber optic installation on my property under an outdated utility easement may not comply with Texas law regarding scope of use. Specifically, Marcus Cable Associates versus Crone established precedent that such installations exceed the scope of easements granted solely for electricity transmission. Additionally, your failure to notify me prior to commencing work constitutes a breach of common courtesy and potentially legal protocol. I demand immediate cessation of all activities related to this project until proper documentation and permissions are obtained. I hit send and waited. The response came faster than expected. A curt reply from HOA Steve claiming he would review my concerns, but insisting that everything was above board. Typical Steve, dodging accountability like it was an Olympic sport. But here's where things took a turn. A few days later, I received another email, not from Steve this time, but from someone at the fiber optic company itself. They wanted to meet with me to discuss potential resolutions. Apparently, my little email had stirred up enough trouble to make them reconsider their approach. When we met, in my field, because where else? They offered me two options. Either let them proceed as planned or negotiate a private agreement for compensation in exchange for access. Compensation? Now we're talking. I played hardball because why not? After all, they'd already inconvenienced me enough with their unauthorized digging spree. In the end, we settled on a deal. They'd pay me an annual fee for using my land as part of their network infrastructure. And just like that, what started as an invasion turned into an opportunity. A chance not only to reclaim control over my property, but also to make HOA Steve squirm in his clipboard-wielding boots. So there I was, sitting on what felt like a small victory. The fiber optic company had agreed to pay me an annual fee for using my land, and HOA Steve was probably sweating bullets knowing I'd thrown a wrench into his neatly planned HOA-approved monopoly. But if you think that's where the story ends, oh no, this is an HOA we're talking about. They don't just admit defeat and move on. They regroup, strategize, and come back swinging harder than a toddler in a candy aisle tantrum. A week after my deal with the fiber optic company, I received a letter from the HOA. And not just any letter, it was one of those official-looking ones with the HOA logo stamped at the top like it was drafted by the Pentagon. Inside was a notice informing me that my field was now under review for compliance with HOA landscaping standards. Landscaping standards. For my field, the same field that had been nothing but grass and dirt for years without so much as a peep from anyone. Apparently, according to Section 14.3 of the HOA bylaws, because of course there's a section for this, all visible property must adhere to community aesthetic guidelines. And wouldn't you know it? My field, my perfectly normal, unremarkable field, was now deemed an eyesore that detracted from neighborhood harmony. Harmony? We're talking about a patch of grass surrounded by fences and trees. It's not like I was running an illegal tire dump or hosting midnight goat races. But here's the thing about HOAs. They don't care about logic. They care about control. And this little landscaping stunt, this was their way of reminding me who they thought held the reins in this neighborhood. Spoiler alert, it wasn't me. Now, I could have just rolled over and complied. Mowed the grass, planted some flowers, maybe even thrown in a decorative garden gnome to appease their aesthetic sensibilities. But where's the fun in that? If they wanted to play dirty, I was more than happy to roll up my sleeves and join them in the mud. First, I did some recon. Turns out, Karen down the street, the same Karen who had sided with me during the fiber optic fiasco, had a backyard that looked like it belonged on an episode of Hoarders. Old lawn furniture, broken flower pots, and what appeared to be half of a trampoline were scattered everywhere. And yet, no landscaping violation notices for Karen. Interesting. Then there was Bob across the cul-de-sac. Bob had decided last year that he wanted to build a koi pond in his front yard, but gave up halfway through when he realized he didn't know how ponds work. Now he's got a giant hole filled with stagnant water and enough mosquitoes to start his own pest control business. Still no landscaping violations for Bob. And let's not forget Linda, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA board, whose front yard is decorated with so many inflatable holiday decorations year-round that her house looks like it's auditioning for National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. But sure, let's target my field because it doesn't fit their idea of harmony. Armed with these observations and several photos for evidence, I decided it was time to fight fire with fire, or in this case, bylaws with bylaws. You see, buried deep within the HOA rulebook is something called the Equal Enforcement Clause. It basically says that any rules or standards must be applied consistently across all properties within the community. In other words, if my field is an eyesore, then so is Karen's backyard junkyard, Bob's mosquito breeding ground, and Linda's inflatable Santa army. I drafted another email, this time addressed directly to Linda and CC'd every member of the HOA board. Dear Linda, I recently received notice regarding alleged landscaping violations on my property. While I appreciate your commitment to maintaining community standards, I couldn't help but notice several other properties within our neighborhood that appear to fall short of these same guidelines. Attached are photographs documenting examples of non-compliance across multiple addresses. As per Section 7.2 of the HOA bylaws regarding equal enforcement, I trust you will issue similar notices to these homeowners promptly. Additionally, I would like clarification on what specific changes are required for my property to meet compliance standards. I hit send and waited. The response came 2 days later. A vague reply from Linda claiming she would review my concerns, but insisting that my field still needed immediate attention. Classic HOA deflection tactics. Acknowledge nothing, promise everything. But here's where things got fun. Over the next week, several neighbors started receiving landscaping violation notices. The same neighbors whose properties I'd highlighted in my email. Karen was furious. Bob looked confused. Linda wasn't happy either because she'd apparently forgotten her own yard technically fell under HOA jurisdiction too. Suddenly, everyone in the neighborhood was up in arms. Not at me, but at the HOA board itself. People were calling meetings, demanding explanations, and questioning why these rules were being enforced so selectively in the first place. It was chaos, and honestly, it was glorious. Meanwhile, I decided to take things one step further. If they wanted landscaping improvements on my field, fine. I'd give them landscaping improvements they'd never forget. So I hired a local artist, a guy named Chad who specializes in eco-friendly installations, and commissioned him to create what can only be described as modern art meets absurdity. Chad transformed my field into a masterpiece. Towering sculptures made from recycled materials, colorful wildflowers planted in intricate patterns, even a small gazebo painted bright pink with a sign reading, "Welcome to Jack's Field of Dreams." It was beautiful and completely ridiculous. The best part? Everything technically complied with HOA guidelines because Chad made sure every detail adhered to their rules down to the letter. There wasn't a single thing they could legally object to, even if Linda looked like she might explode every time she drove past it. And just like that, harmony returned to our neighborhood, or at least as much harmony as you can expect when half your neighbors are plotting ways to overthrow their HOA board. You'd think turning my field into a whimsical art installation would have been enough to end the HOA drama, right? Wrong. If there's one thing I've learned about HOAs, it's that they're like cockroaches, impossible to kill and annoyingly persistent. My Field of Dreams masterpiece may have technically complied with their rules, but it also did something else. It made them mad. And when HOAs get mad, they don't just stew quietly, they retaliate. The retaliation came in the form of a special HOA meeting. Now, if you've never attended an HOA meeting, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a group of people sitting in folding chairs in a stuffy community center, arguing over things like fence heights and acceptable mailbox colors. It's like jury duty, but somehow worse because everyone thinks they're an expert on suburban governance. This particular meeting was called specifically to address the growing concerns surrounding Jack's field. Growing concerns. You'd think I was running an illegal nightclub out there instead of showcasing recycled sculptures and wildflowers. Naturally, I decided to attend, partly because I wanted to defend myself and partly because I wanted to watch Linda squirm when she tried to explain why my field was suddenly public enemy number one. The meeting started with Linda standing at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, because apparently clipboards are mandatory for HOA leaders, addressing the crowd like she was delivering a State of the Union speech. As many of you know, she began, her voice dripping with faux concern. We've recently encountered issues with one of our properties that may be impacting the overall aesthetic and harmony of our community. Harmony again. I swear, if I hear that word one more time, I'm going to start throwing tomatoes. Assuming I ever get around to planting them again. Linda continued, while we appreciate creativity and individuality, it's important that all properties adhere to the standards set forth in our bylaws. At this point, Karen raised her hand. What about Bob's mosquito pond? She asked loudly. Are we going to talk about that? Linda froze for a moment before recovering with a forced smile. That's not on the agenda today. Why not? Karen pressed. It's been sitting there for months. Bob looked uncomfortable but said nothing, probably because he knew Karen had a point. Before Linda could respond, another neighbor chimed in. And what about your yard, Linda? You've got inflatable decorations up year-round. Isn't that against the rules? Now it was Linda's turn to squirm. Those decorations are seasonal, she said defensively. Seasonal? Someone else muttered. You had an inflatable turkey up in February. The room erupted into laughter, except for Linda, whose forced smile was starting to look more like a grimace. Finally, Linda regained control of the meeting and turned her attention back to me. Jack, she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. While your installation is unique, we've received complaints from several residents who feel it doesn't align with our community standards. Complaints, I repeated. From who? Linda hesitated for just a moment too long before replying. That information is confidential. Confidential, right? Because nothing says transparency like anonymous complaints conveniently weaponized against me. Well, I said slowly, standing up from my chair and addressing the room like I was auditioning for Law and Order. If anyone here has an issue with my field, they're welcome to speak up now. Silence. Not a single person raised their hand or voiced a concern. Not even Karen, who usually has something to say about everything. Interesting, I continued, because as far as I can tell, the only person who seems bothered by my field is you, Linda. More laughter from the crowd. Linda looked like she wanted to evaporate into thin air. And let me remind everyone, I added, pulling out a copy of the HOA bylaws that I'd highlighted and tabbed for maximum effect. Yes, I came prepared. That my installation complies fully with these guidelines. If Linda wants to enforce additional standards beyond what's written here, she'll need approval from the entire board, and possibly even a vote from all homeowners. Linda opened her mouth as if to argue but quickly closed it again when she realized she had no rebuttal. The meeting ended shortly after that, with no resolution on my field but plenty of grumbling from neighbors about other issues that had nothing to do with me. And honestly, that felt like a win. But here's where things took an unexpected turn. A few days later, I got an email, not from Linda or anyone on the HOA board, but from one of my neighbors named Tom. Tom works for a local internet provider, the same provider competing with the fiber optic company that originally invaded my land. Tom's email was short and sweet. Hey Jack, love what you've done with your field. Any chance you'd be interested in leasing part of it for our network infrastructure? We're looking to expand coverage in this area. I stared at the email for a good minute before bursting out laughing. The irony, the very thing that started this whole mess, the fiber optic cables, was now giving me leverage against both the HOA and their preferred internet provider. I replied immediately, "Tom, let's talk." Within a week, we had an agreement in place. Tom's company would lease part of my field for their network equipment at a rate higher than what the original fiber optic company was paying me, and they'd offer discounted internet plans exclusively for residents in our neighborhood. It was perfect. Not only was I making money off my land again, but I was also giving my neighbors an alternative to the overpriced monopoly supported by the HOA. When word got out about this deal, because let's face it, nothing stays secret in an HOA community, Linda looked like she might implode from sheer frustration. Meanwhile, Karen stopped by my house with cookies as a thank you for lowering her internet bill. Even Bob sent me an awkward thumbs-up emoji via text, which is probably his version of heartfelt gratitude. As for me, well, let's just say revenge tastes sweeter when it comes with passive income. So, there I was, sitting on my porch, sipping a cold beer, and watching as Tom's crew installed their shiny new network equipment in my field. It was a beautiful sight, like watching justice unfold in slow motion. My once eyesore of a field was now not only a local attraction thanks to my art installation but also a hub for affordable internet. I turned what started as an HOA-fueled nightmare into a win-win situation for me and the neighborhood. But, of course, the HOA wasn't about to let me ride off into the sunset without one last attempt to ruin my day. A few days after Tom's installation was complete, I got another letter from the HOA. This time, it wasn't about landscaping or aesthetics. It was about unauthorized commercial activity on residential property. Yep, they were now accusing me of violating zoning laws by leasing part of my land to Tom's company. I couldn't help but laugh. These people were like mosquitoes at a barbecue, relentless and impossible to ignore. But here's the thing, I'd done my homework. Before signing anything with Tom's company, I'd made sure everything was above board. Turns out, my property sits on a weird little patch of land that technically falls under mixed-use zoning. Translation: I could lease it for commercial purposes without breaking any rules. And the best part? The HOA had no jurisdiction over zoning laws. None. Zero. Zilch. Still, I wasn't about to let them off the hook for trying to intimidate me again. So, I decided to respond in the most Jack way possible, with an email dripping in sarcasm and legal jargon. Dear Linda and esteemed members of the HOA board, I began, because you've got to butter them up before delivering the punchline. Thank you for your recent letter regarding unauthorized commercial activity on my property. While I appreciate your concern for maintaining the integrity of our community, I must respectfully point out that my lease agreement with Tom's company complies fully with local zoning regulations. I attached copies of the zoning documents, highlighted for their convenience, and continued. As you'll see, my property is designated as mixed use, allowing for both residential and commercial activities. Furthermore, since this matter falls under municipal jurisdiction rather than HOA oversight, I trust we can consider this issue resolved. Then came the kicker. However, if you have any further concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out, preferably via email or phone, as my mailbox is currently being upgraded as part of Tom's new high-speed internet service. I hit send and sat back with a grin so wide it probably could have been seen from space. The HOA didn't respond directly to my email, probably because they knew they'd been outplayed, but they did call another special meeting. This time, it wasn't just about me. It was about preserving the values and traditions of our community. Translation: they were trying to rally support against me by framing my actions as some kind of existential threat to suburban life as we know it. The meeting was held in Linda's backyard, because apparently nothing screams serious governance like folding chairs and lemonade pitchers, and half the neighborhood showed up. But instead of siding with Linda and her clipboard army, most people seemed indifferent. Some even supported me outright. Karen stood up at one point and said, "Honestly, Jack's field is the best thing this neighborhood has going for it right now. Have you seen what he's done? It's art. And thanks to his deal with Tom's company, I'm paying half what I used to for internet." Bob chimed in next. "Yeah, and maybe now I can finally stream Netflix without buffering every 5 seconds." Even Linda's husband, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner this whole time, muttered something about how he wouldn't mind faster internet speeds. By the end of the meeting, it was clear Linda had lost whatever support she thought she had. People were tired of her nitpicking and power plays. They wanted cheaper internet and fewer pointless rules, not more drama over a field that wasn't bothering anyone. After that meeting, things started to quiet down. Linda stopped sending me letters, or maybe she just ran out of stamps. And the HOA seemed to back off entirely. My field remained exactly as it was, part art installation, part internet hub, and 100% mine. But here's the real kicker, the cherry on top of this whole ridiculous saga. A few weeks later, I got another email from Tom's company. They'd been so impressed with how well their new network was performing in our area that they wanted to expand further, and they were willing to pay me even more to lease additional space on my property. So now, not only am I making passive income from 2 different fiber optic companies using my land, yes, 2. The original company came crawling back once they realized they couldn't compete, but I've also become something of a local legend. People stop by all the time to admire my sculptures or ask how they can get in on these sweet internet deals. And Linda? Well, let's just say she doesn't make eye contact with me anymore when we pass each other on the street. So what's the moral of this story? Simple. Don't mess with someone who has time on their hands and access to Google. Whether it's an HOA trying to micromanage your life or a utility company digging up your yard without permission, there's always a way to fight back, and sometimes even profit from it. If you enjoyed this tale of suburban revenge and bureaucratic absurdity as much as I enjoyed living it, do me a favor. Like this video, share it with your friends who've ever had an HOA horror story of their own. Leave a comment below telling me how you'd handle a situation like this, or better yet, share your own revenge stories. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of everyday chaos turned triumph. Thanks for watching, and remember, your home is your castle, but your field? That's where the real fun happens.